Hello, and welcome to School Leader Soundbites. I'm your host, Veronica Sofer, and I have the pleasure of coming to you every week talking about K-12 communications, whether it's advertising, marketing, public relations, strategy, thought leadership, you name it. All of those things work hand in hand to make sure that our school districts are supporting the brand that we put out to our community. So very excited about today's episode because we're going to talk about crisis communication, which is one of my favorite topics and the one that I think most of us need to always be learning and growing in. So we are going to go ahead and kick off this episode talking about a Go Kit, what it is, why you need it, and what's in it. But before we get started, let's take a moment to remind our listeners to hit subscribe. We don't want you to miss any episodes of School Leader Soundbites. And if you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, drop me some comments so I can be sure to circle back with you. So let's dig into what a Go Kit is and why you need it. So oftentimes when we think about crisis communications and crisis planning, we're working with our risk management folks, we're working with our police department or any of the police departments that we work with. And we are talking about things like reunification and logistics and shelters and those kinds of things. We always go into the tools that we're going to need to make sure that we're communicating accurately. But one of the physical things that we don't talk a lot about is a Go Kit and why you need it. So oftentimes when you think about emergency preparedness, say you live in a part of the country where earthquakes are prevalent or hurricanes are prevalent, we are always trained to have a Go Kit. And inside that Go Kit is important documentation, tools, supplies, everything you're going to need in those first 24 hours to make sure that you are ready for a crisis. So in a communications department, what that might look like in a school district, or if you're in a school district that doesn't have a communications department and it's the leadership team, the superintendent or the deputy superintendent or one of the assistant superintendents might be charged with the communications function. And so you need a Go Kit. And it can be as simple as a plastic container with a lid on it that you've got that it's see-through so you can see what's in it, and you can make sure you've got it ready to go at your door in case of an emergency, especially if you're called off-site to a campus where you might need to be able to respond quickly, or if you are in a situation where you need to go to the command center, one of your other team members who has been assigned that task has access to the Go Kit. And I always have more than one. I have one at the door ready to go. I also have a smaller version of it for the admin assistant who supports that function, because the likelihood that that staff member will need a Go Kit too is pretty high. And then I also keep one in the car. So what that looks like for me is it's a smaller container, but it's got some of the essentials. And what do I mean by the essentials? What needs to be in your Go Kit? Well, you need to make sure you've got some water. You've got a couple of granola bars, some protein bars, those kinds of things. You also need to make sure that you've got a clipboard, pens and pencils. You need to make sure you've got your district map in there. You need to make sure you've got phone chargers, battery chargers for your laptop. You need to make sure you've got highlighters, scissors, tape. Those are the kinds of things you need. You also want to make sure you've got some jump drives, because if you're working with media and you prepare some content on your laptop, you may not have access to internet. So you may not be able to email or post the way you want to. So you want to make sure you have a couple of jump drives so that you can transfer information to from one device to the other. And if possible, a hotspot. Now, here's the great thing about hotspots. Yes, your phone can often be used as a hotspot, but you also want to have a multiple phone carriers if possible. So whether if AT&T is your choice or T-Mobile or whatever your choice is, make sure you've got one of several different options for in case those carriers are having emergency outages as well. That has actually happened to me, which is why I have a second device with a second carrier, because you want to make sure that you've got access to that. So check with your IT department and see what is available. But the idea here is redundancy, because we know in technology, redundancy is important for cybersecurity and for file restorations and all those kinds of things. But you also are going to need it for the day of crisis. So make sure that you've got multiple ways to connect to the internet as well. So getting back to what else you need in it, you're going to need some blank paper, not just sticky notes, but 8.5 by 11 blank paper, because sometimes you're going to need to write on them and hand it off to someone, because again, you won't have access to a printer instantly. You may not have access to the internet to email something. So you're going to have to jot down some of these concepts, notes, messages, those kinds of things. And you're going to want to be able to hand it off to somebody so that they can maybe get to somebody who does have internet and who can transcribe it and put it out there. So make sure you've got some paper as well that you can write on. The other couple of things I always remind people that they need to have, other than a map of your district, is a bio of your superintendent, or access to bios for senior staff. That includes access to bios of your principals. And I always, and I repeat this over and over to folks when we talk about crisis communication planning, is make sure your passwords are updated. So make sure there's a cheat sheet for all of the passwords. It is printed and it is updated. So go through that every 3 to 4 months. Just put a reminder on your phone, put a reminder on your calendar. Make sure the admin assistants have reminders. We want to make sure all the passwords are up to date, because in a case of emergency, it's oftentimes when the password needs to be refreshed, and you need to be able to make sure that everyone has access to those passwords. Likewise, you want to make sure that all the accounts are valid and they are not in old profiles. In other words, if you have staff members who retired or who left the district, if they are still set up in their names using their emails, you won't be able to reset the password because there's no one there on the other side to get it, because that oftentimes that email address is no longer valid. So really take a few minutes, a couple of times a year, to make sure that work is done and that the source files are accessible to a couple of trusted people who have security authorization to have those passwords. That's going to be really, really important. A couple of other things you might need in it for ladies: comfortable shoes. There have been a lot of times when I have been on the scene of a crisis and I was not wearing the appropriate shoes and I ended up having to go barefoot. Not okay when you are on a crisis site and you are running around. So you need to make sure you've got access to comfortable shoes. Always include those in your go kit as well. And then some of the other items that you might want to have are just additional office supplies. Any type of office supplies that you might need. You are probably going to be hanging signage. And so you're going to want not only tape that's appropriate to hang in buildings, but that will also hold up in weather. So you might need to have different types of tape that you're going to want to be able to use, because that immediate signage isn't going to be there. I always also recommend that you, especially if you're in the communications function, that you are wearing a public information officer vest, an easy way for media to recognize you. Some of us are vertically challenged, and at 5 foot even, give or take, I have been missed in a crowd when media was looking for the spokesperson and they needed someone to be able to interview quickly to get on air. So if you've got a public information officer vest, that will also be really helpful. If you don't have a formal public information officer in your district, then you need to make sure that your crisis communication plan has identified someone who will speak on behalf of the district. So that may be the superintendent, it may be the chief of police, it may be the deputy superintendent. So make sure that person is identified, that they have updated all of their training, and they have a go kit ready to go, and they've got a vest to identify themselves. Because again, when there's a lot of people running around, you want to be able to make yourself readily available to media. And then making sure that you've got templates. That's really important too. So on your jump drive, especially if you're using another device and it's not the laptop you normally use or an iPad, you want to make sure you have all those template communications out there, those instant messages that will go out on social media, those instant messages that will go to parents' cell phones or to other people that you've designated them to. Part of that also means that you have a way for them to get back to you, that there's a form of two-way communication. So if you're at the command center and you've got somebody out and about in the field, they do not need to be worried about returning emails. So you need to make sure that there is someone who has internet access that can return emails or can be using some of your two-way communication platforms. This is actually a pretty good time for me to take a break and thank our show sponsor, our official School Leader podcast sponsor for School Leader Soundbites, K-12 Insight. They have some phenomenal tools that will really help facilitate your two-way communication plan. I was a customer in every district I have worked in, and I highly recommend you check out all of the different ways that they can help school districts with communications. They do a phenomenal job. Their customer service is excellent, and they are all about finding solutions that will help make engaging with your communities so much easier. So make sure you check them out, k12insight.com/SOPHER. Just let them know that Veronica sent you, and one of their team members will be sure to circle back and connect with you. So thanking them is really important because, again, they're invested in the types of tools that they develop for what school districts are using. So if you are a K-12 Insight customer, you're going to want to connect with them and make sure that you've got your Let's Talk connected so that in case of an emergency, someone can easily update it with the type of crisis that you're experiencing. Maybe it's a gas leak or a fire, or maybe it is an earthquake or some sort of natural disaster. You're going to want to make sure those buttons are live and ready to go. So somebody on the other end needs to hit go on those. Same thing with your dark pages. If you do not have a dark page on your website, superintendents, hear me now. If you do not have a dark page on your website, you need one ready to go. So talk to someone in the communications department or the IT department and get some insight on how to make that happen. So what is a dark page and why is it important to your Go Kit? Well, if you are picking up your Go Kit on your way out the door, it's because you are managing a crisis and you're likely going to need your dark page. So what your dark page is it's a page on your website that becomes very prominent, that has some basic facts about your district, where you're at, the addresses, who the superintendent is, who the board members are, with pictures of people, demographic information, how many students are in the district, how much land it covers, a map of the district, all of those really quick factual information pieces that a media outlet will need if they're not familiar with your district. So in a situation like this, you're likely going to get media who's not used to covering you. And so when they go to a press conference, you want to make sure they spell the superintendent's name correctly. You want to make sure that they spell the campus names correctly. So if you have all of that readily available to them, that page is built out, it lives on your website, but it is not live and it is only made active after an incident has been initiated. So part of your communication strategy in a crisis will be making sure that page is live and active. Again, just like those passwords, you're going to want to check that pretty regularly to make sure that it's current. The last thing you want to do is make your dark page active and it has dated information. It doesn't have the correct name of the superintendent or the leadership or anyone else. But you're going to want to make sure that pictures are also included, because oftentimes, especially if a media outlet is getting to a press conference late and the person's already identified themselves who's speaking at the podium, they're going to want to be able to recognize that person, and then they can use the tools that you've made available to them to make sure that they get everyone's name information. So that's really, really important. So as we wrap up this episode of School Leader Soundbites, one of the reasons why I'm bringing Go Kits to your attention is because I just conducted we're looking at their crisis communication plan and what they had ready and where there were some gaps. Now, this district had done a phenomenal job of getting everyone FEMA certified. The communications team was ready to go. They had all their templates, and I was just really impressed with how well prepared they were. And the thing that impressed me the most is that they were willing to learn. And so we took a look at their crisis communication plan and we took it to the next level. We started developing training specifically for principals and assistant principals. We started developing asynchronous themes that we could create small videos for so that people could get trained on a regular basis. And so the goal was for the school district to have for their senior leadership team, which included their principals, regular touch points. So every quarter, a 6 to 8 minute video is being released that talks about a crisis and crisis planning and how the district can be prepared and ready to go. One of the cherries on top of the audit that we put together for them was really mapping out not only all their communication templates, but all of the logistical templates and what you need to have, the supplies you need to have in your Go Kit. Like I said, water, protein bars, all those kinds of things, comfortable shoes, things we don't think about. And I always want to remind people that we learn as we grow. So when you engage with an audit, you need to make sure you're coming to it with an open mind, ready to learn, ready to grow, and ready to start implementing some of those recommendations to make sure that you are prepared to handle a crisis and that your brand for your district is shining bright and people have built trust with you. Because we have to remember, in a crisis, people often don't remember all the details about it, but they remember how they were left feeling. So you want to make sure your stakeholders, your community, other elected officials are proud of the work that was done when there is a crisis so that they can continue to be strong advocates for you. So, with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode of School Leader Soundbites. Reminder, if you are listening on the podcast, make sure you hit subscribe. We don't want you to miss any episodes of School Leader Soundbites. And if you are watching on YouTube or Facebook, drop me some comments. I would love to connect with you, learn more about what you're doing in your district, and offer any suggestions or support I can. So, as always, you can reach me at veronicavsofer.com. I look forward to our next conversation. And until then, make sure you get your crisis plan updated and your good go kit is ready to go.